This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, Michael Covel. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. Today on the show, I have Barry Schwartz. Barry is an American psychologist. He's a professor of social theory and social action at Swarthmore College. He has been published everywhere. He has some great TED Talks that you should check out. Two of his books, The Paradox of Choice, Why More is Less, and Practical Wisdom. Barry's work is right there at the foundation of why any trader or investor will have success. Of course, his work is at the foundation of why any type of success or happiness would unfold regardless of investing or trading. I hope you enjoy. Hey, Barry, how are you?
All right, how are you?
Not too bad. Not too bad. Where am I catching you? In Philadelphia?
Yeah, that's where I live.
Okay. I'm right outside D.C. today.
Uh-huh.
So I want to go right to the heart of what you bring to the table, at least some of the things, and that'd be two main topic areas, choice and practical wisdom. Uh-huh. And I thought for my audience, there might be a really interesting example that I've seen you use, and maybe I'll let you elaborate, which is the idea of choice and selecting a mutual fund and how you've seen that happen and unfold within corporations. Just kind of as a warm-up to get people into the idea of where you come from on these subjects.
Certainly. There's a kind of ideology that characterizes American society and most Western societies, that is that since choice is good because it contributes to freedom, and freedom is good, more choice is better. And it seems almost like this has to be true logically, because if you don't want all that choice, you can ignore it, in which case you're no worse off. And if you don't want it, and if you do want it, well, here's this huge array, and you can find what's just right for you from this array. So if you think about investing, it seems when employees have a limited number of options for 401k mutual fund type investments, chances are pretty good that there won't be the one that's perfect for them, that, satisfies their taste for risk, diversification, various ideological filters, you name it. And if you add options, the existing options are still there, so if you're satisfied with them, there they are. And meanwhile, people who aren't satisfied can choose from all these new ones. So how could you possibly oppose adding options, since it's bound to make some people better off and nobody worse off? And so we think, employers think they're doing employees a favor by giving them more and more options to choose from. The data suggests, paradoxically, that when people have lots of mutual fund options to choose from, they are more likely to choose none. And the reason is that they have such a hard time deciding which one to choose that they just keep on postponing and postponing and postponing and postponing. And of course, the meter is running, the clock is ticking, they're passing up matching money from the employer. And it's a very significant effect. For every 10 mutual funds you offer, participation goes down 2%. In addition, people make worse choices. When they can overcome paralysis and they choose less well. So these two prongs of too much choice are, one, that it induces paralysis, and two, that it induces bad decisions. This has been shown now in lots and lots of areas. Doesn't always happen, but it often happens. Trivial things like buying jam at a food store, very consequential things like signing up for Medicare Part D drug plans and participating in 401ks.
But freedom and choice is America.
Freedom and choice is America. And in truth, psychology contributed to this idea that if there's one thing you can't have too much of, it's choice. It enables us to be autonomous. It enables us to shape our own lives. Who could possibly be opposed to it? And indeed, when you do studies that compare one option to two or two options to three, more is always better than less. And it didn't occur to anyone to compare, say, 3 options to 30. And a point is reached where instead of benefiting from all this choice, people start to suffer. But you're right, it's America, and it's in the water supply. It's almost impossible to really punch holes in this ideology that almost all of us share.
So in my world, I will assist people with looking at portfolios and assembling portfolios beyond just mutual funds. And often it's the meat and potatoes markets where the moves happen, whether it's the big currencies or the big metals or the big stocks. But invariably, when you try and get people to focus on, let's say, 40, 50, 60 of the big liquid markets, invariably, they're always fixated on some obscure penny stock that they heard about a friend who made millions on. So even though it's like that's kind of the lottery ticket, you can show them all the evidence that it makes sense to stay in the big wheelhouse of the big markets, they fixate on the outlier that they heard about from the friend, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, and I think this partly, it's sort of like buying a lottery ticket. And people know it's irrational to buy lottery tickets, and nonetheless, it's their only chance to completely change their lives. So you can kind of, it's hard to call it irrational, even though the expected value is very negative, because this is their one ticket to complete transformation. So it could be that, but I think what happens is that people are looking desperately for a way to differentiate one option from others when there's just a sea of options. So they fixate on something. Here's an analogy. There was a study done of speed dating, and what varied was the number of partners you saw in an evening. And when people saw 12 partners, when women saw 12 partners, they were less likely to make a match than when they only saw 6. Again, this makes no sense, but this is what happened. But more interestingly, and I think this is the penny stock analogy, they chose on the basis of characteristics that they knew were not the most important characteristics. They chose entirely on the basis of how attractive their potential partner was, and not on the basis of how kind, how funny, how good a listener, how intelligent, because those are hard things to evaluate. And it's, you might try to evaluate them when you only have a few options, candidates to evaluate. But when you have a dozen, you just sort of shrug your shoulders. You choose on the basis of what's easy to evaluate and cross your fingers and hope that what's easy to evaluate is also what's important. And of course, typically it's not.
That's a really, I just got back from spending 4 days in San Diego, and I felt that in what you just described, I felt entirely that it seemed like, as a male, and I'm interested in females, I noticed that seemed to be the vibe that was running in that particular city. It seemed like that the judgment. And look, of course, everyone looks at the outside first, but I think what you just described is a really important concept for people to think about. It's not affecting us in a good way, is it? This is not helping our mental life, is it?
I think it is not helping our mental life, because the third problem with too much choice, and this is a problem that I personally have focused my own work on the most, is that even if you manage to overcome paralysis and choose, and even if you manage to choose well, you're going to end up less satisfied than you would have been if you'd made exactly the same choice from a smaller choice set. Because when you choose, you choose the grilled chicken and rice in a restaurant that has 30 options, and it's good. It's delicious. But, you're thinking as you take each mouthful about how good the shrimp might have been, and how good the pasta might have been, and how good the lamb might have been. And each one of these missed opportunities makes you less satisfied with what you've chosen, even if you didn't make a mistake. And I think that you see this happening in online dating. People are always kind of looking over their partner's shoulder in case a better option comes by. And this is not good
we don't live forever, though.
Right, we don't live forever, but and that kind of suggests, grab the best because life is short. The trouble is that if you're out to grab the best, you'll be dead before you find it.
Yeah, it's the freedom aspect is really interesting. I spent last year in Vietnam, and here is a country that is communist by government, and I did not detect among the people or the society any less freedom or happiness than America.
Well, there's a lot of research on what it is that determines happiness, and some of it is cross-national, cross-cultural, and it's not a simple story. It looks like political democracy matters to happiness, but which would suggest that if you're in a communist country, even if it's got like lots of market freedom and opportunities for entrepreneurship, people will be less satisfied in that country than one in which they're participants in the political process. But, the thing that's hard to judge is how an autocratic regime actually cuts at the local level. And so you may have an autocratic regime, but its tentacles are essentially invisible at the level of day-to-day life. And you may have another autocratic regime where its tentacles are present in everything you do. So it's really hard to judge against the general claim that being in a democratic society is better than not for people's well-being, whether that's going to be true of any particular non-democratic society.
Yeah, of course, I was not taking it to the level of research that you might apply when you're looking at things from an academic perspective. But it just seemed like to me that maybe sometimes in America we do fixate on all this freedom. But once again, and I think some of your research has shown this, the happiness is not always following.
Oh, I think quite the opposite. I've seen it in my students. I've been teaching at the same place for almost 45 years. They're wonderful students, the cream of the crop. Very selective institution, and we just give them more and more freedom. I mean, that's just been the way all academic institutions have moved. Fewer and fewer required courses, you create your own major. They can pretty much do whatever they want. And if I had to make a judgment about their psychological state now as opposed to when I started, it would be that they're much more fragile, much more uncertain, much less satisfied with what they're doing, second-guessing themselves much more of the time than was the case, 40 years ago. Now, lots of things have changed. I don't want to pin all of this on our removing of constraints on what students study, but I think that plays a significant role.
I just find this subject fascinating, even though I come at the world from putting books out about the markets and trading and whatnot. This type of thinking, regardless of the endeavor that one pursues, being grounded in these thoughts of how choice and freedom and how they all interact, I think this is paramount for any success that one wants to chase in their life.
I think that's absolutely right, and I think that in a market context, the compromise that enables freedom and also overcomes this paralysis and dissatisfaction is to have essentially infinite freedom, but highly curated by experts. So you can make 1 million different investments, but there's somebody, namely you, who's telling me that of the 1 million different investments, these are the 8 that you should take seriously. And if you don't like my 8, I'm not stopping you from choosing others. So in principle, all the options are there. But there's some structure that an expert is imposing that will enable people to negotiate what's otherwise not a negotiable domain.
You just shifted to an area that I want to go next, really, which is the idea that decision making has shifted from the expert to the individual. And I was wondering if you could use the example that I've seen you use with the prescription drug commercials and how essentially we're seeing these prescription drug commercials run nonstop. Yeah. About solving our depression and increasing our erections, but we can't go buy these drugs ourselves.
That's right. Now, the paradox in this is extraordinary. And, to young people, when I talk about this to a relatively young audience, they have no idea what I'm talking about because they've grown up in a world where there is nonstop marketing of prescription drugs to the lay public. But I don't know, 20 years ago, it wasn't even legal. Not to mention that there was no point in doing it since, you wanted to advertise to doctors, not to their patients. But when they started advertising to patients, the question is, why were they doing it? Why are they wasting all this money? And you're right. It's just unbelievable how it's nonstop marketing of drugs. Why are they wasting their money marketing prescription drugs to people who can't buy them? The answer, presumably, is that what they believe is that you will hear about this new cholesterol fighting drug or erection producing drug or what have you, and immediately call your doctor and say, I want to switch to this. And that, of course, doesn't sell any of the drug. What does is that when you tell your doctor this, the doctor then complies with your request, which means that the patient is now in charge of his or her health. And doctors mostly just accede to patient demands. And I can't help but think, given the billions of dollars that drug companies spend, that this is actually what happens.
So we have this paradox of choice. There's no excuse for failure. But talk to me for a second about what you're seeing, what the evidence shows on the rate of change, clinical depression. Are we seeing an explosion? I mean, it's not just the TV commercials advertising the depression drugs. Is a lot of this choice and this inability to make a decision and all this freedom, is this driving clinical depression?
Well, you're asking two different questions. The first I can answer empirically. The second is speculative. Is there an explosion of clinical depression? The answer to that is yes. Now, it's difficult to come up with quantitative assessments that you have confidence in that span, 50 years or more, because, among other things, people are less embarrassed to admit that they're depressed than they were a half century ago. There's less stigma attached to it. People are more attuned to the symptoms of depression than they would have been 50 or 60 years ago. So a lot of this increased frequency could just be because of the breaking down barriers to acknowledging emotional difficulties. Nonetheless, it's a huge effect. It's an order of magnitude, a factor of 10. And you see it not only in clinical depression, but also in suicide and in suicide attempts. And that's much more easily objectified than depression symptoms. So suicide's more likely than it used to be, and people try it at younger ages than they used to. So it all seems to me to be pretty clear that we've got an epidemic of clinical depression in modern American society. Now, I speculate that a contributor to this is this choice problem. People just don't know how to make decisions, what decisions to make. There are no constraints. There's no framework within which, they get to shape their lives. There's a cartoon that I show when I talk about this of a simple goldfish bowl, and there's a big fish and a small fish, presumably a papa or mama fish and a baby. And the caption reads, "You can be anything you want to be, no limits." And of course you see this, and here's this little tiny goldfish bowl with nothing in it, and you laugh because you say to yourself, what do you mean no limits? It's the most limiting environment I could possibly imagine. What does this big fish know? But if you think about it a little bit, I think the deep point of this cartoon, whether the cartoonist meant it or not, is that we all need a fishbowl. And when every possible way of living when every imaginable way of living is possible, what you're doing is shattering the fishbowl. And when you shatter the fishbowl, remove the guides that people might have for making important and even unimportant decisions, what you get is terror, paralysis, and anxiety instead of liberation. And that's what we've essentially done in modern American society. And you see it in the market when it comes to being able to buy anything you want, but you also see it socially and personally. People can shape their romantic lives, their professional lives, to a degree that their parents or certainly their grandparents couldn't have imagined. So the fishbowl has been shattered. And
you say, and I think most people might hear this and they go, what? But the secret to happiness is low expectations. And that makes a slightly different point, but
when you buy a stock and it returns 5% on investment, is that good? How do you evaluate that?
Yeah, it was a 5%. Was it 5% in one day, 5% in a week, 5% in 5 years?
5% annual return of 5%.
Hey, this day and age with zero interest rates sounds pretty good, huh?
Sounds pretty good, right? But it's very hard to evaluate whether that's good. It's good compared to something. What are you comparing it to? You're comparing it to the interest rate, which is essentially zero, to the rate of inflation, which is essentially zero. You're comparing it to what your friend's getting as a return on his investments. You're comparing it to what you got as a return on your investments 3 years ago. So when anything happens, when we make any decision and experience the consequences of that decision, when we ask ourselves, is this good or bad? We answer that by comparing it to something. And one of the things we compare it to is how good we expected it to be. So I tell a story in my book of going to buy jeans. And my jean buying experience used to be going to the Gap, tell it my size, and walk out 30 seconds later with a pair of jeans. And I went in and they said, you want slim fit, easy fit, relaxed fit, button fly, zipper fly. So I had all these options, and I tried on a bunch of jeans, and I walked out with the best fitting jeans I'd ever had. But I felt worse than I ever do. And not because of the time I spent buying these damn jeans, but rather because when they came in all these different styles, I suddenly expected a pair of jeans that would fit perfectly. When they only came in one or two styles, expecting perfection is just foolishness. So my expectations were lower, and I got a pair of jeans that met my expectations. You know, they didn't make me look like a leading man, but they also didn't make me look like a clown. Now there are all these options, and I expect perfection. And what I got was good, but it wasn't perfect, so I ended up feeling like I'd failed. And I think this is if you have high expectations, almost any decision you make will fail to meet them, and you'll end up feeling like you made a bad decision. If you have lower expectations, it's easier for decisions to meet those expectations and even sometimes to exceed expectations. So yes, I said the secret to happiness is having low expectations, and I could feel the air go out of the room when I said it.
Hey, look, if anyone doesn't admit to having that jeans experience that you're talking about, I'm saying they're not telling the truth, because buying jeans today is an absolute nightmare. And the easiest way that I've found to do it is I know there's basically one brand, one style that will fit me normally, and I don't even look at the other brands. So you walk into the store and they start telling you the brands, and I just put the hand up and say, stop, I don't want to know. I know it won't fit me. Where's the ones I want? These are what I want. See you later. That's all
that's what I did. That's exactly what I did. And the two problems. One is they didn't make that kind anymore, of course. And the other is that this salesperson was just intent on showing me all of the wonders of the modern Gap production made possible. So it's, you need to be incredibly resolute, and you also need to cross your fingers and hope that they still make the damn things that you want.
Let's talk about a second area that you have really done a lot of work on, and that's the idea of practical wisdom. And a lot of people can probably hear that phrase, and I don't want to define it, but I want you to, out of the gate, to let people know, what do you mean when you speak to audiences and you're teaching practical wisdom? Why is that so important to you?
Okay, so this in a way, it raises another paradox, because in the work I've done with my collaborator, Kenneth Sharp, on practical wisdom, one of our main points is that there are many areas of life where people have too little choice, not too much. And in particular, in people's work life, and almost any kind of work, being a doctor, being a lawyer, being a teacher, being a janitor in a hospital, which is an example that I talk about with some regularity, work is increasingly regimented so that we have to follow a set of rules that match the job description or something. And our discretion is essentially taken away from us. And what it means to be wise, and we take this idea from Aristotle, the ancient philosopher Aristotle, is to figure out the right thing to do in each situation. Wise people do the right thing, and they do it for the right reason. And the idea is that there is no formula that tells you, no algorithm that tells you what the right thing to do is, because it's almost always going to depend on the context. You're giving financial advice to a client. You can derive all of these risk-benefit curves and sort of come up with a theoretical ideal investment portfolio, but it may not fit with the sort of psychological state of the client you're advising. This may be a highly risk-tolerant client. That one may be a highly risk-averse client. You need to tailor your recommendations to the person sitting in front of you, and that requires judgment. And the book we wrote is all about how more and more workplaces are taking the opportunity for people to use judgment and discretion out of people's hands. And this is, A, making people less good at the jobs they do, B, making it so that people get much less satisfaction out of the jobs that they do. We seem to think that if you have the right set of rules and the right set of incentives, you don't need wise people, because good rules and smart incentives are adequate substitutes for wisdom. And our argument is that that's simply not true.
It's tough. I had an example last year when I was overseas, and I needed to practice yoga in a hotel. And this one lady at the front desk was very nice, and she took me to an obscure location in the hotel. You could tell no one had really been there. It was like on the second floor. It was an empty room. And she actually got in trouble for thinking outside the box to find me this location where I could be. And I think it's a great, simple example of what you're talking about, which is in the large operations, the large corporations, the large institutions, there's a script to follow. There's rules to follow. And if you break those, you don't get the job. You don't get to keep your just follow the rules robot job. They don't want you to think.
No, that's exactly right. And you see this dramatically now in education. And I think the reason we see it there is that people don't trust the judgment of teachers. And so somebody sitting in the central office in Chicago or New York or Philadelphia comes up with a curriculum and writes scripts, and every teacher in the system is supposed to follow the scripts. These scripts are not perfect, but the idea is if they follow the script, we at least prevent catastrophes. And if we let them use their judgment, who the hell knows what will happen? And what happens when you operate an educational system like this, of course, is that the scripts are never right for each kid or even each class, beyond which all the good teachers, the people who want to use their initiative and creativity and flexibility and judgment, they get driven out of the system. The good teachers leave, and you're left with teachers who have no judgment, for whom the script is necessary. But what you end up getting then is mediocrity instead of excellence. No excellent teacher will stay on the job if the job involves reciting a script every day.
Well, I think you've also hit the nail on the head, so to speak, for politics, regardless of one's partisan side. I think politics has driven out those creative leaders, and now it seems like on both sides of the aisle you have people that are just following scripts.
I think that's right, but I think that the real problem in politics, and this is a part of practical wisdom that people often miss, the wise people both have the skill to figure out the right thing to do and the will to do the right thing. And I think the main problem in politics is the loss of will to do the right thing. I think it's hard to find a political leader who is interested in anything other than increasing his or her power and influence.
Staying in office.
And getting reelected.
Yeah.
And so it's never a question of what does the country need. It's a question of what do I need to do to fend off my extreme right-wing challenger, to get people who are independents to vote for me. I mean, pick the issue depending on the electoral district. It's never about what does the country need. And, I think I don't want to over-romanticize the past, but at least when the country started, that was the mission of all of the founding fathers, was to produce and sustain a flourishing democracy And we have had peaks and troughs in that sort of commitment to the ideal of a country that's well governed over the 250 years since we started. But I think we're in a trough now, unlike any that I've experienced. And I think it is completely bipartisan. I don't think that people on one side of the aisle are any more corrupt in this regard than people on the other side of the aisle.
You make the case. You say, hey, people want to be virtuous. And you talk about practical wisdom as a key to happiness. And happiness, what your love life, your work life, having that's something you can be passionate about. In my world, I think for me, I've been an entrepreneur for over 15 years. I'm passionate about what I do. When I hear it in your voice, you are passionate about what you do. It seems like to me, it's terribly difficult that if somebody wakes up and they say, as an early 20-something, and this has changed, of course, over the decades too. But today, if you start out as an early 20-something, you are given a script for almost every large organization. To me, it seems like the best path, and now, somebody said, well, Mike, everybody can't be a passionate entrepreneur. But I'd say, why not? Because to me, it seems like the shortcut to find this virtuous life, to find passion and happiness is to go use these great technology tools that we have today and not be a part of the system that's giving you the script, but to go off the script and do your own thing. When you hear that, what do you think when you hear me say that?
Well, so I think that captures part of what makes life worth living and what seems to promote happiness, but it also misses another part in the following sense. There seem to be the two most important determinants of well-being, based on what the literature tells us now, are finding meaningful and engaging work and having close relations to other people. And I think the second of those, that is being part of a community of mutual care and concern, is not going to be served by this independent entrepreneurial spirit. Much better is to be a part of an organization whose mission you value, whose mission you're passionate about, and whose other members you're eager to interact with and work with in pursuit of a common objective. So if you work in an organization where you come in and there's a script to follow and in all frankness, nobody cares about the final result, well, yes, going out on your own is much, much better than that. But if you are part of an organization where people are all genuinely committed to excellence or to, providing health care for the poor or job training or whatever it is, then you have the best of both worlds. You have freedom to use your judgment in designing the program, in providing these medical services, what have you, and you're part of a community of like-minded people. And I think going out on your own is sort of the desperate move that a lot of people make because they can't find institutions, organizations like what I'm describing. And it looks like the only way to get any satisfaction out of their waking hours is by being an entrepreneur.
I'll grant you that. I think if I look back to my mid-20s when I broke out with an online presence to reach people in the finance space, I'll grant you that it probably would have been much more fun and engaging if I had a group of like-minded people surrounding me and we were all going towards a certain mission. For example, like maybe early Apple computer or something. But you're right in the sense that's tough to find.
It is tough to find, but I think it's particularly tough to find if people don't appreciate how important it is. If you appreciate how important it is, it's a little less tough to find, and more importantly, it gives you the chance to create such an environment. There's a lot of research on private sector organizations and sort of trying to figure out what predicts success. And the striking thing is that across industries, the successful organizations are the ones in which people are eager to show up for work every day. They created, think of Southwest Airlines. They create an environment in which they respect the mission, they respect the integrity of the leadership, and they like working with one another. And I think when you can demonstrate that it serves the bottom line to organize your organization in these ways, you create a space for people to get some of the satisfaction out of their work life without compromising the bottom line. In fact, contributing to the bottom line. And there's just a kind of myopia on the part of leaders about the value of this. Another kind of ideology, which is tough, militaristic leadership with strict accountability and measurement of everything, is the way to go. And there's just lots of evidence that that's not the way to go.
I love this topic. I do. No, I do. Because I think most people just don't want to talk about this. They don't want to think about it. They just want to just keep marching in some preconceived march path, and they don't want to stop for a second and sit back and go, whoa, okay, where am I in this whole curve that Barry is talking about? How have I approached my life? Where am I sitting right now? Can I do something better? We've got limited time, so we better make good choices. Listen, I want to end with one last question, Barry, and maybe I'm not sure where I want to go with this, but I know you've spoken about it a lot, and that's post the financial crisis. And what do you think post the financial crisis? Have we moved to a better place, or has the human condition left us in the same place, ultimately waiting for the same type of kind of pop boom, desperate situation to reoccur again? Or have we made some improvements from your perspective?
Well, when the financial crisis first hit, several people asked me to speculate about whether there was any silver lining in this cloud. And one thing I said is that although it's obviously terrible for people's nest eggs to get eroded and for people to lose their jobs, I mean, that's unspeakably terrible, that the potential silver lining is that people, if it lasted long enough, people would learn that there are more important things in life than what they've been pursuing, and that it was possible to have a meaningful and satisfying life with a lower standard of living than they had aspired to. That is to say, people could develop different habits that would focus them on much more rewarding aspects of their day-to-day lives. Now, there's a huge price to pay for that, because we're talking about people losing their jobs and losing their houses. So I don't want to minimize how serious that is. But I don't think that any of that has happened, and it's been a while now. It's really been long enough for at least some people's expectations to have shifted down, material expectations to have shifted down a fair amount. I don't think it's happened. Partly, it's because the virtual economy recovered very quickly, even if the real economy didn't. So lots of people have seen the value of their investments return to what it was. And the result is that I see very little evidence of changes in life aspiration, which is to say that we're back where we started from. I think maybe some of the regulations that have been introduced will protect us for a while from another implosion. But I think unless we change what we're trying to achieve in life, it's just a question of when it will occur and which bubble will burst rather than if it will occur. So I'm not really, I think there's been a lot of suffering with very little gain.
Yeah. It will be interesting to see how things unfold. I do think we are in a current cycle of life that is boom bust, bubble boom bust, and I don't see that has gone away. But you can feel it, and I'm sure you feel this just anecdotally. You can feel right now with equity markets where they're at. I'm starting to feel that kind of enthusiasm that starts to happen in a go-go time period. And just certain people are like, I had a friend of mine reach out to me the other day, and this is a guy who has never made one good investment. And, he was bragging about how much of a return he had in 2013. And I said to myself, he might be the top of the market. So.
Well, what's his name? John Bogle, the guy who started Vanguard. And he's now become a sort of curmudgeonly elder statesman. He wrote a book called Enough. I think it has an exclamation point. And his point is that we don't know what enough is. In fact, we tend to think that there's no such thing as enough. And as long as that's true, No matter how much you have, you can always have more, and you should be aspiring to having more. As long as that's true, this boom-bust cycle that you're describing, it seems to me, will never go away.
Yeah.
But knowing what enough is means that you have a sense of what's actually valuable in life, and where is that supposed to come from?
It doesn't come from society, because society is telling you to buy cholesterol medication and erection medication.
No. It does not come from society. I think that it doesn't much come from families. I think lots of religious institutions, which is where it once came from, have kind of lost their nerve when it comes to offering serious guidance to people about how they should live their day-to-day lives. And when they do offer guidance, people rebel against it. So I don't know where it's going to come from. And I think in the absence of a sense of enough, it's just a question of when the next accident happens.
Look, it's got to come from internal, because like for today, I didn't reach out to you because you were on some list. I was going through, I have all different types of people on my podcast, and I just liked where you were coming from. And I think it's incumbent on the individual to be curious and to go find people that maybe have a few years or a few decades more experience and try and learn something incremental more from them to kind of build yourself along better. But I think if that internal drive is not there, that seems to be also part of this, why we're not, the internal drive seems to have been either lobotomized out or just pushed to the side.
I think that's right. But the problem is better. What does better mean?
Yep.
Better is, again, relative to some set of aspirations. And in the absence of any sense of what enough is, it's not clear that people can articulate to themselves what these aspirations are, who to listen to, who to ignore, what's important, what's unimportant. Yes, individuals have to make those judgments, but they don't make them in a vacuum. They make them heavily influenced by other people around them and by what they see on television, which is mostly ads for Viagra. And
people are going to think that's our whole conversation today was about her Viagra ads, huh?
Viagra, I know. I just want to know who came up with the idea of using 2 19th century bathtubs as a symbol for sexual intercourse.
I'm sure.
I don't even think that's Viagra. I think that's one of its competitors.
Oh man, we crazy times, but hopefully maybe we gave a little bit of you today gave some inspiration to people to think more about these issues and check out your books. Hey Barry, where's the best place for people to reach out and find more information about you?
Well, I have a website they can go to and they can find it by going to Swarthmore College website. The books are all for sale on Amazon. So that's what I would advise.
Okay. Hey, I appreciate it, Barry, and hopefully in the time to come we can speak again. I appreciate your time today.
I appreciate your interest and how well you prepared yourself for this interview. You know my work better than I do.
I'm trying. I can't fall down. I can't have smart people on and look bad, Hey, Barry, take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.